Our next topic is inverse matrices. Before we jump into inverses, we need to talk about the identity matrix. You can see in front of you we have three identity matrices, all of which are square matrices, and that's one property of the identity. The other property is that they have diagonals of 1 and then zeros everywhere else. And what's true of an identity matrix is very much similar to what's true of the identity multiplicative process, which states that 1 times any value b is equal to the value b. But when we talk about matrices, if we take any matrix identity, multiply it by a matrix, we get that matrix back. And in this case, the matrix is also commutative, so if we take that same matrix and multiply it by the identity, we get the matrix back. Now, an inverse matrix is a matrix such that if I take what's known as this inverse and multiply it by a matrix, we get the identity matrix when we're done. If a matrix actually has an inverse, it's called non-singular. Some matrices won't have inverses, and we call those singular matrices. And what we're going to do now is discuss how we would go about actually finding an inverse of a matrix without using a calculator. So you'll see in front of you I've got this augmented matrix. And what we're noticing is that the given matrix is on one side and the identity matrix is on the other. The goal of finding the inverse is to take this augmented matrix and make it such that I have the identity on the left side and some new matrix on the right side, and this new matrix will be the inverse. So our first step will be to try to get a 1 up in this upper left-hand corner, if at all possible. And I can do that a couple of different ways. I can switch the rows, which I think I'm going to do in this first step. So let's redraw, and I'm going to say this is row 2 and this is now row 1. So I have 1, 4, 0, 1 and 2, negative 3, 1, 0. We need to get a 0 here, a 0 here, and a 1 here. So in order to get a 0 in the bottom left hand, I'll first rewrite my top. Once again, I want to get a 0 here, so if I take and multiply negative 2 times row 1 and add that to row 2, I'll get the desired effect down here of a 0. So multiply by negative 2, add to 2, get 0, multiply by negative 2, add to 3, get negative 11, multiply by negative 2, add to 1, get 1, multiply by negative 2, add to 0, get negative 2. Alright, so now what I've got to do is I've got to create a situation where I have a 0 up here and a 1 here. Well, I'm going to create the 1 here first. So what I'll do is take 1, 4, 0, 1, and then I'm going to multiply negative 1/11 by row 2 and replace that row. So this is 0, positive 1, negative 1 over 11, and negative 2 over 11. Finally, I need to make this element right here a 0. I can do that in one more step. So let's take and rewrite the bottom because that's going to stay the same. And now in order to make this element equal to a 0, I'll take and multiply negative 4 times row 2 and add it to row 1. If I multiply negative 4 times 0, add it to 1, I get 1. Negative 4 times 1, add it to 4 is 0. Negative 4 times negative 1/11 is 4/11. And negative 4 times negative 2/11 is negative 8/11. Plus 1, which is 11/11, is 3/11. So what now I have on the right, this is my inverse matrix. I'll take and say my inverse is equal to 4/11, negative 1/11, 3/11, and negative 2/11. Now, we can check this by either multiplying my initial matrix by this and getting the identity, or by taking and using a calculator to check it out. So let's go ahead and do that. So you see I've gone back up to the top of the screen. Here's my matrix, 2, negative 3, 1, and 4. I'll plug that into the calculator by hitting second and the matrix button. I want to edit the matrix. So I'll go ahead, move over to edit, and we'll edit this first matrix here. Hit enter. Notice I've already got something in here, so I'm going to change that to a 2 by 2. So I hit 2 by 2. And I'm going to type in the elements 2, negative 3, 1, and 4. Quit out of that. Go back to matrix. And rather than edit, I'm going to just hit 1. It will appear on my home screen. Hit the inverse button. And I want to see fractions, so I'm going to hit math, frac, enter. And you'll notice I have 4/11, 3/11, negative 1/11, and 2/11. And those just happen to be the values of the inverse matrix that we calculated. So once again, I want to take and move the matrix around such that I get an identity matrix over on the left, and what will appear on the right is my inverse. So we notice we already have a 1 in this first row, first column position. I want to try to get a 0 here. So in order to do that, I'll go ahead and write this first row again. And then to get the second row to lead with a 0, I'm going to take negative 2 times my first row and add that to my second row. In doing that, negative 2 times 1 plus 2 is 0. Negative 2 times 0 plus negative 2 is negative 2. Negative 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7. Negative 2 times 1 is negative 2 plus 0 is negative 2. 0 plus 1, 0 plus 0. And then I'll rewrite this last row as is. So now you'll notice I have a leading 1 in my first row, 0 is below. Now I need to change this negative 2 to a 1. And one of the things I see that I could do right now if I wanted to is I could switch row 2 and row 1 just to get a 1 up there and not create any fractions. And I think I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. So I'll take redraw of 1, 0, negative 3, 1, 0, and 0. And then, like I said, I'm going to switch rows. So this is going to be row 3. This is going to be row 2. So I have 0, negative 1. Actually, let's multiply row 3 by a negative and move that up. So this will be positive 1, negative 3, 0, 0, and negative 1. And then row 2, I can leave that negative, really doesn't matter. So I'm going to go 0, negative 2, 7, -2, 1, and 0. So the next thing I have to do, I notice I have a positive 1 here now. I'm going to need a 0 down in this next row. So let's go ahead and do that. Give me a little more room on the page first. And we'll rewrite that top row. Get 1, 0, -3, 1, 0, and 0. Second row is also fine. 0, 1, -3, 0, 0, -1. And once again, I want to get a 0 in this element here. So I'll take, and if I multiply row 2 by 2 and add it to row 3, that'll achieve getting a 0 here. So 2 row 2 plus row 3 is going to get the job done. 2 times 0 is 0, plus 0 is 0. 2 times 1 is 2, minus 2 is 0. Multiply by 2 here, get -6 added to 7, I get 1. Multiply by 2, I get 0, it's still -2. Multiply by 2, 0, add it to 1. Multiply by 2, and I end up with a -2. So now you'll notice I have my diagonals of 1, which is great, but I have to make these values both 0. So I can do that probably in our next step. Let's try to go ahead and do that. So in this case, my bottom row is going to remain the same. So that's 0, 0, 1, -2, 1, and -2. I'm going to change the next two rows. If I multiply row 3 by 3 and add it to row 2, I'll get a 0 here. If I multiply 3 times row 3 and add it to row 1, I'll get the same 0 effect. So let's go ahead and do this. Start here on this row. Multiply by 3 and add it, I still get 0. Multiply by 3 and add it, I still get 1. Multiply by 3 and add, I get 0. Multiply by 3 and add, I get -6. Multiply by 3 and add, I get +3. Multiply by 3 and add, I get -7. Next I'll go up to this top row and compare that with my multiples of 3 in my third row. Multiply 0 by 3 and add, I get 1. Multiply by 3 and add, I get 0. Multiply by 3 and add, I get 0. Multiply by 3 and add, I get -5. Multiply by 3 and add, I get +3. And multiply by 3 and add, I get -6. So this should be my inverse here. Let's go ahead and do this on a calculator and check it out. So you'll see I've gone back to my original matrix, edited a matrix in my calculator to be a 3 by 3, plugged in all the values. We'll quit out of that, hit matrix again. So second matrix, I just plugged it into matrix A, hit my inverse button, and hope I get nice clean numbers. And sure enough, those numbers compare to exactly what we calculated. So it's pretty easy to do this. It just takes a little time and being careful using your elementary row operations. Go ahead and do my math lab and your lesson summary, and we'll discuss a little bit more tomorrow.